The letter arrived on a Tuesday, its crisp envelope slicing through my life like a guillotine. It was from my husband, David, and his mother, Evelyn, two people I'd trusted with my heart, now demanding my fortune. They claimed my $4 million inheritance, left by my late father, was rightfully theirs, and I had 3 days to comply or face a lawsuit. I stood frozen in our kitchen, the paper trembling in my hands. The audacity of it burned. David, the man I'd loved for a decade, and Evelyn, who'd called me daughter at our wedding, had conspired to strip me bare. My father's legacy, earned through years of sweat building his construction empire, was all I had left of him. Now, they wanted to tear it away, as if my grief were a bank vault they could crack. I sank into a chair, the weight of betrayal crushing my chest. David hadn't been home in days, claiming business trips, but the truth was in the letter's cold legalese. He and Evelyn had been plotting for months. My mind raced back to subtle signs, the whispered phone calls, Evelyn's sudden interest in my father's will, David's late-night meetings. How had I been so blind? The man who'd vowed to protect me was now my enemy, and his mother, the architect of this scheme, was no less ruthless. I wasn't always this fragile. Growing up, I was my father's shadow, tough, scrappy, learning the trade on dusty construction sites. He'd taught me to fight for what was mine, to never let anyone walk over me. But love had softened me, made me trust David's warm smile and Evelyn's maternal hugs. That was my mistake. Now, with my father gone and my marriage a lie, I felt the old fire flicker back to life. They thought I'd crumble. They were wrong. I called my best friend, Sarah, a lawyer with a knack for cutting through bullshit. "They're coming for everything," I said, voice shaking. "I need you to help me fight." Sarah didn't hesitate. "We'll bury them," she promised. By nightfall, she was at my house, papers spread across the dining table, mapping out a plan. The letter cited community property laws and Evelyn's claim that she'd invested in our marriage through emotional support. It was laughable, but dangerous. Evelyn had a reputation for manipulating legal loopholes. Sarah dug into David's finances first. We found irregularities, large transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, dated months before my father's death. "He's been siphoning money," Sarah said, pointing to a statement. "And look, Evelyn's name is on these accounts." My stomach churned. They'd been planning this before Dad even got sick. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was premeditated, a slow poison they'd fed me while I grieved. I barely slept that night, haunted by memories of David's charm, his promises of a future together. We'd met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions, and dreams of building something real. He'd seemed so genuine, so in love. But now, I saw the cracks, his impatience when I spoke of my father's business, his subtle pushes to control our finances. Evelyn had always been in the background, her syrupy sweetness masking a calculating mind. She'd raised David to see money as power, and I was their latest conquest. By morning, I was done crying. Anger replaced despair, sharp and clarifying. I called a private investigator, Mark, recommended by Sarah. "Find everything," I told him. "Every email, every text, every dirty secret." Mark nodded, his grizzled face unreadable. "Give me a week," he said. I didn't have a week, but I trusted him. Meanwhile, Sarah filed a countersuit, alleging fraud and emotional distress. We weren't just defending my inheritance, we were going on the offensive. The next day, I confronted David. He showed up at the house, all false concern, claiming he just wanted to talk. His eyes darted nervously, avoiding mine. "This is a misunderstanding, Claire," he said, using my name like a weapon. "Mom and I just want what's fair." I laughed, a bitter sound that startled him. "Fair? You think stealing my father's legacy is fair?" His mask slipped, revealing a flash of guilt, but he doubled down. "You've always been selfish with that money," he snapped. "We're a family. It's ours." I wanted to scream, to throw something, but I held it together. "Get out," I said, my voice ice cold. He left, but not before tossing a parting shot. "You'll regret this, Claire." As the door slammed, I vowed he'd be the one with regrets. Evelyn's influence was clear. David was her puppet, but I wasn't fighting a man. I was fighting a dynasty of greed. Sarah and I spent the next few days building our case. Mark's early findings were damning. Emails between David and Evelyn, discussing how to secure my inheritance. One message from Evelyn read, "She's too emotional to manage it. We'll do better." The arrogance made my blood boil. They'd underestimated me, but that was their mistake. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the years he'd spent building something to leave behind. They wouldn't take that from me. As the week ended, Mark uncovered a bombshell. David had been forging documents, claiming I'd agreed to transfer the inheritance to a joint account. The signatures were sloppy, nothing like mine, but they'd been notarized, likely through one of Evelyn's shady connections. Sarah grinned when she saw the evidence. "This is fraud, Claire. We've got them." For the first time, I felt a spark of hope. They'd tried to destroy me, but I was ready to fight back, brutally, relentlessly, and without mercy. The courtroom loomed like a battlefield, its polished wood and stern air amplifying my nerves. I sat beside Sarah, my hands gripping the table, as David and Evelyn entered, their faces smug with misplaced confidence. They didn't know the storm I'd prepared, the evidence stacked against them like a loaded gun. Sarah had warned me. Family court was a snake pit. David's lawyer, a slick man named Peterson, oozed charm, painting me as an unstable widow hoarding my father's wealth. "Ms. Claire Thompson," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "has denied her husband and his family their rightful share." I wanted to lunge across the room, but Sarah's hand on mine kept me grounded. "Let them dig their grave," she whispered. Our first move was to present the forged documents. Sarah projected them on a screen, the clumsy signatures glaring under the courtroom's harsh lights. David's face paled, and Evelyn's lips tightened into a thin line. Peterson tried to object, claiming the documents were misinterpreted, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Explain the discrepancies," she demanded. Peterson stammered, unprepared for our precision. Mark's investigation had gone deeper than I'd hoped. He'd traced the notary to a disgraced official tied to Evelyn's real estate ventures. The woman had a history of bending rules for cash, and Mark had her confession on record. Sarah played the audio for the court, the notary's trembling voice admitting she'd been paid to falsify my signature. The room went silent, the weight of their deceit hanging heavy. David squirmed in his seat, his eyes darting to Evelyn for rescue. She sat rigid, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer suit doing little to hide her panic. I almost pitied them, almost. But then I remembered my father's voice, rough from years of shouting over construction noise, telling me to stand tall. This was my stand. Sarah called our next witness, a forensic accountant who dissected David's finances. The accountant revealed a web of hidden accounts, offshore transfers, and shady investments, all linked to Evelyn's real estate empire. Mr. Thompson and his mother planned to divert Ms. Thompson's inheritance into these accounts, the accountant said, pointing to a chart. They began moving funds before her father's death. The judge's eyebrows shot up, and I felt a surge of vindication. Peterson tried to pivot, accusing me of fabricating evidence out of spite. "Ms. Thompson is emotionally unstable," he claimed, citing my grief over my father's death. It was a low blow, and it stung. But Sarah was ready. She submitted my father's will, which explicitly named me as sole beneficiary, along with a letter he'd written me, urging me to protect his legacy. The judge read it silently, her expression softening. I fought back tears, not from weakness, but from the weight of my father's trust. Outside the courtroom, David cornered me during a recess. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he hissed, his breath hot with desperation. "Just give us half, and this ends." His audacity reignited my fury. "You betrayed me," I said, stepping closer, my voice low and steady. "You don't get to dictate terms." He flinched, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Back in court, Sarah dismantled their case piece by piece. She presented text messages between David and Evelyn, plotting to pressure me into signing over the money. One text from David read, "She's breaking. Keep pushing." My heart twisted, but I channeled the pain into resolve. They'd underestimated my strength, my father's lessons, my will to fight. Evelyn took the stand next, her voice syrupy with false sincerity. I only wanted to help Claire manage her grief, she claimed, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. It was a performance, but a weak one. Sarah cross-examined her ruthlessly, exposing contradictions in her story. So, you helped by forging documents? Sarah asked, her tone sharp. Evelyn faltered, her composure cracking. By the end of the day, the judge adjourned, promising a ruling soon. I left the courtroom exhausted but alive with purpose. Sarah squeezed my hand. We've got them on the ropes, she said. But I knew this wasn't over. David and Evelyn were cornered, and cornered animals were dangerous. I need to stay sharp, ready for whatever they threw next. My father's legacy wasn't just money. It was my identity, my strength, and I'd fight to my last breath to protect it. The days after the first court hearing were a blur of adrenaline and dread. David and Evelyn weren't backing down. If anything, they were doubling their efforts, spreading lies to anyone who'd listen. I overheard a neighbor whisper that I was greedy, hoarding my father's fortune while my poor husband suffered. The betrayal stung, but I refused to let their smear campaign break me. Sarah uncovered their next move. They were pushing for mediation, hoping to pressure me into a settlement. They know they're losing, she said, poring over case files in my living room. Mediation is their last chance to scare you into giving up. I nodded, my jaw tight. I wasn't scared anymore, just angry. They tried to paint me as the villain, but I was ready to expose their true colors. Mark, the private investigator, called with more dirt. He'd hacked into an old email account David thought he'd deleted. The messages were a goldmine. Evelyn instructing David to soften Claire up with guilt trips, even suggesting he faked tears to manipulate me. Another email detailed their plan to use my inheritance to fund Evelyn's failing real estate ventures. They're desperate, Mark said. Evelyn's company is drowning in debt. Armed with this, Sarah and I prepared for mediation. The session was held in a sterile conference room, the air thick with tension. David sat across from me, his face a mask of fake remorse. Evelyn, beside him, wore a smug smile, as if she'd already won. The mediator, a neutral woman with a clipboard, urged us to find common ground. I almost laughed. There was no common ground with thieves. Sarah took charge, laying out our evidence. The emails, the forged documents, the hidden accounts. David's face reddened with every revelation, while Evelyn's smile faded. This is slander, she snapped, but the mediator raised a hand, silencing her. I spoke next, my voice steady despite the storm inside. My father worked his whole life for that money, I said. He trusted me to protect it. You don't get to steal his legacy because you're greedy. David tried to interrupt, but I cut him off. You lied to me, David. You planned this with your mother while I was grieving. The room went quiet, the weight of my words sinking in. Even the mediator looked uncomfortable. Evelyn tried to pivot, claiming she was protecting the family, but Sarah shut her down with a single question. How does forging my client's signature protect anyone? The mediation collapsed. David stormed out, muttering curses, while Evelyn lingered, her eyes boring into mine. You'll regret this, she said, echoing David's earlier threat. I met her gaze, unflinching. Try me, I replied. As she left, I felt a strange calm. They could threaten all they wanted, but I was done being their victim. Back home, Sarah and I planned our next move. The judge had hinted at criminal charges for fraud, and we were ready to push for it. Mark's investigation uncovered more. Evelyn had a history of shady deals, including a lawsuit from a former business partner who'd been swindled. We filed a motion to include this in our case, arguing it showed a pattern of deceit. Sarah was relentless, her legal mind a weapon I was grateful to have on my side. But the fight wasn't just in court. David started calling friends and family, spinning a story that I was mentally unstable, trying to turn them against me. Some believed him, and the isolation hurt more than I'd expected. My aunt, one of my few remaining relatives, called to plead his case. He's family, Claire, she said. Can't you forgive him? I hung up, tears stinging my eyes. Family didn't betray like this. I leaned on Sarah and Mark, who became my anchors. Sarah reminded me of my father's strength, how he'd fought through recessions and competitors to build his empire. You're his daughter, she said. You've got his fire. Mark, gruff but kind, brought me coffee and updates, his quiet support a lifeline. Together, we were a team, and I wasn't fighting alone. As the next court date loomed, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. David and Evelyn thought they could bully me into submission, but they'd miscalculated. I wasn't just protecting my inheritance. I was reclaiming my life, my strength, my father's legacy. They'd push me to the edge, but I was ready to push back harder. The second court hearing was a crucible, testing every ounce of my resolve. David and Evelyn's lawyer, Peterson, came prepared this time, armed with character witnesses who painted me as cold and unyielding. A former colleague of David's claimed I'd isolated him, while Evelyn's friend swore she was a saint who only wanted to help me. Their lies were a knife to the gut, but I kept my face impassive, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Sarah countered with surgical precision. She called witnesses of our own, my father's business partner, who testified to Dad's explicit wish to leave everything to me, and a family friend who'd overheard Evelyn pressuring me to share the inheritance months ago. The friend's testimony was damning. Evelyn said Claire didn't deserve the money, that it was too much for her to handle. The courtroom buzzed, and the judge's pen moved furiously across her notepad. Mark's latest findings sealed the deal. He'd uncovered a paper trail linking Evelyn's real estate company to a shell corporation David had set up. The corporation was a front to funnel my inheritance, and Mark had bank statements proving it. Sarah presented the evidence, her voice calm but lethal. This wasn't a mistake, she said. This was a calculated plan to defraud my client. Peterson's objections were weak, drowned out by the weight of our proof. David took the stand, and I braced myself. He looked haggard, his charm replaced by desperation. I love Claire, he said, his voice breaking. I just wanted us to have a secure future. It was a performance, but a poor one. Sarah tore into him, exposing his lies with the emails and texts Mark had found. Did you love her when you forged her signature? She asked. David stammered, his face crumbling. The judge's expression was unreadable, but I saw her lean forward, listening intently. Evelyn was next, and her arrogance was her downfall. She deflected blame, claiming David acted alone, but Sarah trapped her in contradictions. So, you had no knowledge of the Shell Corporation? Sarah asked, holding up an email Evelyn had sent, directing David to set it up. The courtroom gasped, and Evelyn's face turned ashen. She'd been caught, and she knew it. Outside, during a break, I overheard Peterson arguing with David. You didn't tell me about the emails, he hissed. David's response was inaudible, but his slumped shoulders told me everything. They were fracturing under pressure, their alliance crumbling. I felt a grim satisfaction, but it was fleeting. This fight was draining me, body and soul. That night, I found an old photo of my father and me at a construction site, both of us grinning, covered in dust. The memory hit hard, his pride in me, his belief that I could carry his legacy. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for him, for the life he'd built. I clutched the photo, tears falling, and made a silent promise. I wouldn't let them win. Sarah and I met with the prosecutor the next day. The judge had referred the fraud evidence for criminal investigation, and the prosecutor was eager to move forward. This is textbook fraud, he said, flipping through Mark's files. We'll charge them both. It was a victory, but a heavy one. David had been my husband, my partner. Now, he was a criminal, and I was the one sending him to justice. The community backlash grew worse. Evelyn's friends spread rumors, and I lost more allies. My phone buzzed with cruel messages, calling me heartless, a traitor to my marriage. I deleted them, but each one chipped away at my resolve. Sarah noticed my strain and pulled me aside. You're not alone, she said. You're stronger than they'll ever be. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. As the trial continued, I prepared for the final push. David and Evelyn were desperate, and desperation made them unpredictable. But I was ready. They'd tried to break me, to steal what was mine, but I was my father's daughter, fierce, unyielding, and ready to fight to the end. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, each session hotter than the last. David and Evelyn's defense was unraveling, their lies exposed like frayed wires. But they weren't done fighting dirty. A week before the final hearing, I received an anonymous letter, handwritten, venomous, accusing me of destroying my family for money. I knew it was Evelyn's work. The phrasing echoed her manipulative tone. I handed it to Sarah, who added it to our evidence pile. "They're scared," she said. "This is their last gasp." Mark's investigation reached its peak. He'd tracked down a former employee of Evelyn's company, a whistleblower named Lisa, who'd been fired for questioning shady deals. Lisa was nervous but willing to testify. Evelyn bragged about getting Claire's money. She told us over coffee, her hands shaking. She said it was her retirement plan. I felt sick, but Lisa's courage fueled mine. She agreed to take the stand, a key piece in our arsenal. In court, Lisa's testimony was a bombshell. She detailed Evelyn's history of fraud, from skimming client funds to falsifying contracts. She saw Claire's inheritance as a jackpot, Lisa said, her voice steady despite Evelyn's glare. Sarah followed with financial records, showing how Evelyn's company had been bleeding money for years. My inheritance was their lifeline, and they'd stop at nothing to get it. Peterson tried to discredit Lisa, painting her as a disgruntled ex-employee, but the judge wasn't swayed. The evidence was too strong: bank transfers, emails, Lisa's first-hand account. David's face was a mask of defeat, his eyes avoiding mine. I wanted to feel triumph, but all I felt was exhaustion. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war for my soul, my father's memory. Evelyn's desperation peaked outside the courtroom. She approached me, her face twisted with rage. "You're destroying my son," she spat. "You'll pay for this." I didn't flinch. "You destroyed yourself," I said, my voice calm but steel-edged. She stormed off, but her threat lingered, a dark cloud over my resolve. The prosecutor moved forward with criminal charges, filing counts of fraud and conspiracy against both David and Evelyn. The news hit the local papers, and the community's whispers turned to shouts. I was painted as both victim and villain, depending on who you asked. My father's old friends rallied around me, their support a balm for the wounds of betrayal. "Your dad would be proud," one said, gripping my shoulder. I clung to that, a lifeline in the storm. Sarah prepared me for the final hearing, warning that David might try a last-ditch plea for sympathy. "He'll play the victim," she said. "Don't fall for it." I nodded, but the thought of facing him again twisted my heart. I'd loved him once, believed in our future. Now, he was a stranger, a thief who tried to rob me blind. The night before the hearing, I visited my father's grave. The cold stone grounded me, his name etched in granite a reminder of his strength. "I'm fighting, Dad," I whispered. "I won't let them win." The wind carried my words, and for a moment, I felt him with me, his pride a quiet fire in my chest. In court, David's plea was as Sarah predicted. He stood, tears streaming, begging for forgiveness. "I was weak," he said. "Mom pressured me. I love you, Claire." The words were a punch, but I didn't waver. Sarah cross-examined him, exposing his lies with surgical precision. The judge watched, her face a mask of judgment, as David's story fell apart. Evelyn refused to testify again, her silence damning. The judge adjourned for deliberation, and I left the courtroom with Sarah, my heart pounding. "We did everything we could," she said. I nodded, but the weight was agony. The fight had cost me friends, family, and pieces of myself, but I'd held my ground. Whatever the ruling, I'd shown them I wasn't weak. I was my father's daughter, and I'd fought with everything I had. The wait for the judge's ruling was torture, each day stretching like a lifetime. I busied myself with work, managing my father's construction company, but my mind was a battlefield. David's tearful plea haunted me, not because I believed him, but because it reminded me of the man I'd thought he was. Evelyn's silence, meanwhile, was a different kind of threat, her cunning lurking like a predator in the shadows. Sarah kept me grounded, her calls a daily ritual. "The evidence is airtight," she assured me. "The judge sees through their lies." But doubt gnawed at me. Evelyn had connections, money, and a knack for slipping through cracks. What if she'd found a way to sway the outcome? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the company, my father's legacy, now mine to protect. Mark called with a final piece of evidence. A recorded phone call between Evelyn and a shady lawyer, discussing how to bribe a court official. The call was grainy but clear enough to incriminate her. This could seal the criminal case, Mark said, his voice grim. I felt a surge of hope, but also dread. This fight had changed me, hardened me in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't sure I liked the person I was becoming, but I had no choice. The final hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. David and Evelyn sat stiffly, their faces pale. The judge entered, her expression unreadable, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. She began with the civil case, ruling that my inheritance was mine alone, untouchable by David or Evelyn. The evidence of fraud is overwhelming, she said, her voice cutting through the room. The defendant's actions were deliberate and malicious. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I exhaled, relief flooding me. But the judge wasn't done. She addressed the criminal charges, referring David and Evelyn to the district attorney for prosecution. This court will not tolerate such blatant deceit, she said. David's head dropped, and Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. They'd lost, and they knew it. Outside, reporters swarmed, their questions a blur. Sarah shielded me, guiding me to her car. You did it, Claire, she said, her smile fierce. I nodded, but the victory felt hollow. I'd protected my father's legacy, but at what cost? My marriage was dead, my trust shattered. I drove home alone, the weight of it all pressing down. That night, I found a letter from David, slipped under my door. I'm sorry, it read. I was wrong. Please don't hate me. I tore it up, the pieces fluttering to the floor. His apologies were too late, his remorse a final manipulation. I didn't hate him. I pitied him, a man too weak to stand up to his mother's greed. Evelyn's company collapsed days later, her shady deals exposed by the trial's publicity. Creditors circled, and her reputation crumbled. I heard through Sarah that she'd moved to a smaller town, shunned by her old allies. David faced jail time, his plea deal hinging on testifying against his mother. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd turned on each other, just as they'd turned on me. I threw myself into the company, hiring new staff, securing contracts my father would have been proud of. The work was grueling but healing, a way to rebuild what David and Evelyn had tried to destroy. I visited my father's grave again, laying flowers on the stone. I kept my promise, I said, my voice steady. The wind answered, soft and warm, and I felt him with me. The fight had scarred me, but it had also forged me. I was stronger, sharper, unafraid. David and Evelyn had thought they could break me, but they'd only made me unbreakable. My father's legacy was safe, and so was I. Months after the trial, the dust settled, but the scars remained. I walked through my father's construction sites, the hum of machinery a reminder of his dreams I now carried. The victory in court had secured my inheritance, but it couldn't erase the betrayal or the loneliness that followed. David and Evelyn were gone from my life, but their shadows lingered, a reminder of how deeply trust could cut. The criminal case against them moved slowly, but the prosecutor was relentless. David took a plea deal, testifying against Evelyn to reduce his sentence. He'd served time, a year at least, and I felt no joy in it. Evelyn faced harsher charges, fraud, conspiracy, even attempted bribery. Her trial was ongoing, but the evidence was crushing. Her empire, built on deceit, was rubble, and she had no one to blame but herself. I rebuilt my life piece by piece. The company thrived under my leadership, new contracts flooding in as word spread of my fight. My father's old partners became my mentors, their respect a quiet validation. I hired Lisa, the whistleblower, as my assistant. She'd earned my trust, and her courage inspired me. Together, we were turning the company into something even my father couldn't have imagined. The community's judgment softened over time. Some apologized for believing David's lies, their words awkward but sincere. Others stayed distant, and I let them go. I'd learned who my true allies were: Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and a handful of others who'd stood by me. They were my family now, bound not by blood but by loyalty. I sold the house David and I had shared, its memories too heavy. I bought a new one, smaller but mine, with a view of the city my father had helped build. Late at night, I'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee, reflecting on the woman I'd become. The fight had cost me my marriage, my innocence, but it had given me something greater: strength, purpose, and a fierce love for my father's legacy. One evening, Sarah came over with wine and news. "Evelyn's pleading guilty," she said, raising her glass. "It's over." I clinked my glass against hers, a weight lifting from my chest. It wasn't just about the money. It never had been. It was about proving I could stand up, fight back, and win. For my father, for myself. I started a scholarship in my father's name, funding young women in construction management. It was my way of giving back, of ensuring his legacy lived on in others. The first recipient, a bright 19-year-old with my father's grit, thanked me with tears in her eyes. I saw myself in her, and I knew I'd made him proud. David wrote again from prison, another apology I didn't read. I burned it in the fireplace, the flames cleansing the last of his hold on me. Evelyn's letters came too, full of blame and self-pity. I didn't respond. They tried to destroy me, but I'd risen stronger, a phoenix from their ashes. As winter turned to spring, I stood at a new construction site, the skyline gleaming in the distance. The workers nodded to me, their respect hard-earned. I thought of my father, his calloused hands, his unyielding spirit. "We did it, Dad," I whispered, the wind carrying my words. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was his legacy, fierce and unbroken. The fight had been brutal, but it had forged me into someone new. David and Evelyn had underestimated me, thinking greed would win. They never expected my fight back, my refusal to bend. Now, standing tall, I knew I'd honored my father's memory and found my own.